Hello YouTube friends and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Deidre from our Upcycled Life and I do lots of thrifting, upcycling, repurposing, and DIY content. Love new crafting friends. So make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss any great DIY content. Today's all about painting techniques. I have 4 easy painting techniques that you probably have all the supplies already in your craft room to do all of them. So I'm going to do a step-by-step tutorial on how you can take brand new wood and make it look old and vintage and chippy 4 different ways. Okay, let's get started. Today I'm going to show you 4 quick and easy ways to take brand new pieces of wood and make them look old and vintage and chippy. These are really easy to do and you probably have all the products that you need right in your craft supplies. I'm using 4 pieces of scrap pine, all cut to the same size, and I'm prepping them all the same way. So when these techniques are done, you can see the difference between each one. I've got them all sanded down, and now I'm going to put on a coat of some oil-based stain. I like using a dark color as my base coat, so when I distress, that dark color will peek through. The first technique that I'm going to show you is using oil-based stain. We already have the first coat of oil-based stain on there. Now I'm putting a second one on, but we're not letting it dry. While it's still wet, I'm taking my chalk paint and I'm brushing it on top of that oil-based stain. The oil-based stain and the water-based chalk paint do not like to be mixed together, and it'll leave a streaky finish, as you can see here. The next technique is to use Vaseline. Wherever you put Vaseline on your piece of wood, the paint will not adhere to it. So when you sand it later after it's completely dried, wherever there was Vaseline, you will be able to see the layer of paint underneath. I've applied the Vaseline all around the outside edge of that piece of wood, and now I'm taking my chalk paint and I'm going to paint right over top of that Vaseline, set it aside, and let it dry completely. The third technique is to use salt. I love using pickling salt. It gives a really authentic chippy look, but you can also use table salt or bath salts. I'm just going to paint chalk paint over the entire board, and then I'm just going to sprinkle the salt right into that wet paint. The more salt that you put on, the more chippy of a finish you're going to have in the end. I like to sprinkle it over the entire board into that wet paint. If you only want it chippy around the edges, then just apply the salt around the outside of the board. And then set it aside and let it dry completely. The last technique is so simple. All you need is a scraper. I just picked this scraper up at the dollar store. You can find them at the hardware store. And we're just going to paint on our chalk paint, and while it's still wet, just scrape that scraper along that wet paint and take off that top layer. This will make a brand new piece of wood look vintage and old in a minute. And you can control how much paint you take off, whether you want it really weathered looking or just lightly weathered, by how many times you scrape that scraper along the top surface of that wet paint. Once they're all dry, I'm going to take an 80 grit sandpaper and I'm going to sand all over those boards and around the edges and finish our distressed look. The first one that I'm sanding is the oil-based stain. Now, one thing that you should take into consideration when doing this technique is you're going to get oil-based stain on your paintbrush. So don't use a good brush, or you'll have to clean it with a special cleaner to take off the oil-based stain and the chalk paint. The next technique is the Vaseline method. Anywhere where I have applied the Vaseline, when I take the sander over it, the paint has not adhered to it and it will sand away, giving a really chippy look. This one is the scraper method, and it is so simple and so easy to achieve an old vintage look just with a scraper and a little bit of chalk paint. Next board we're going to work on is the one that I applied the salt to. This one can get really messy, so make sure you're doing it outside or in an area where it doesn't matter if it gets dirty. We're just using that 80 grit sandpaper and we're sanding off all of that salt. And as you do, it creates this wonderful finish. I think this is actually my favorite for creating authentic looking signs and using this technique underneath. And here are the 4 techniques side by side. And you can see how each one looks completely different. I've taken all 4 of these boards and I've made them into signs using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method, so you can see how much of a difference the technique of aging your wood underneath can make when you're creating signs. I hope this tutorial has been helpful, and let me know down in the comments which one's your favorite. Also, make sure to like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.